When it comes to video game consoles, a topic I find particularly interesting is add-ons. I'm not talking about accessories like coolers, stands, or controller chargers. I mean devices that connect to the system and provide extra functionality. Recent examples include the PlayStation VR and Xbox Kinect. Infamously, the Sega Genesis was also known for its add-ons, with all its wires and space-hogging wall warts. But there's one add-on that stands out to me because of its nice design and general usefulness. It's the Game Boy Player. The Game Boy Player is an add-on for my favorite lunchbox, the Nintendo GameCube. It actually looks like a proper cube now. The player attaches to the bottom of the console and allows you to play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. There are some games that have sensors in them, like WarioWare for the GBA, so those don't really work. Unless you want to shake the console around, but that isn't really advisable. I guess that means the Game Boy camera doesn't work that well either, but you get the point. Let's take a closer look at this thing. I think it's really well designed. It just plugs into the bottom of the GameCube, no wires and extra cables required, and the console's footprint remains exactly the same and only becomes slightly taller. Make sure to secure the screws for extra safety, and if you don't have a screwdriver handy, you can use a coin too. Thanks, Nintendo. The cartridges go in here. Game Boy Advance cartridges are hella flush, but older Game Boy games will poke out noticeably. There's an eject thing that allows you to launch the cartridge if you'd rather be playing something else. A link cable can be plugged in the front if you want to live the multiplayer life, or just want to trade some Pokemon between your own games. But the Game Boy Player doesn't work on its own. This disc is needed to make sure all of this actually works. Let's take some time to appreciate the case though. Some of you might already know that this is the case design used for Japanese GameCube games. I always thought the game discs looked pretty dinky inside the normal DVD-sized cases. The JDM spec case is also transparent, and I think it looks much more interesting than what we got over here. But then again, the bigger case allows for bigger manuals, and many GameCube games had pretty awesome manuals. Well, that was slightly off topic, but when do I ever get a chance to talk about this stuff? Thankfully, Nintendo took into account that everyone's got a different setup, so there are a couple of options to play around with. Screen size just makes the screen slightly larger. There's no way to make everything completely full screen, but I can see what Nintendo was going for, since it's really easy for portable games to look really bad on larger screens. The border can be changed if you want. I prefer something neutral most of the time, but it's nice to have fun with, something colorful every now and then. There are 3 screen filter options: soft, normal, and sharp. I didn't notice much of a difference, to be honest, on my LCD screen, but I did on my CRT TV. For this video, I kept it on normal, but I changed this setting depending on the game or which TV I'm playing this on. Thankfully, it's an easy setting to change on the fly. You can just access the menu by pressing the Z button. In terms of controls, things are pretty straightforward. The left analog stick and the D-pad act as the Game Boy's D-pad, and the A and B buttons do exactly what you'd think they should be doing. L and R are L and R, and both X and Y act as the select button, and you can guess what the start button does. If you prefer, you can change the control scheme to another mode, which make the X and Y buttons act as triggers, and the triggers act as select. Sounds a bit strange at first, but it kind of makes sense if you think about it. There's 2 reasons for that actually. The L and R buttons on the GameCube controller have quite a bit of travel before they actually engage, so it makes sense, to me anyways, to give the option to change them to buttons with more immediate actuation. The GBA also had a few SNES re-releases, so the control scheme would translate much better this way too. Now all I need is something to keep me from pressing the Z button instead of R. I guess that's just my own stupidity, that can't be fixed. For some reason, there's also a timer which doesn't stop the game once it's done counting down. I guess you can use it as a cooking timer maybe? If you have a GBA to GameCube cable, you can use your GBA as a controller. It's kind of cool that that option was included, but ultimately I find the GameCube controller nicer to use. As I already mentioned, there are a few compatibility issues to consider with the Game Boy Player. Games with motion sensors aren't really going to work. Games with Super Game Boy enhancements work, but you won't be able to use any of the enhancements. Also, I had trouble running an unlicensed game and a fake cartridge, but honestly, I never expected those to work in the first place. And that's the Nintendo GameCube player. It's one of my favorite console add-ons. Obviously, there's always someone going to mention that I could just use an emulator to play these games on a big screen, but I like playing games on official hardware. It contributes to the overall experience. Game Boy players aren't terribly common, but if you happen to have a GameCube and can find one of these things for a decent price, I would highly recommend picking one up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.